What you're about to hear is a story about a single violent touch in the sterile chaos of an airport terminal. A touch that ignited a firestorm. It's a story of prejudice, power, and the terrifying moment a police officer sworn to protect decides a black woman doesn't belong. He saw her designer travel wear and first-class ticket and saw a fraud. He heard her confident voice and heard a threat. He put his hands on her to remove her from the flight. But he made one catastrophic mistake. He assumed she was just another passenger. He never imagined he was putting his hands on the woman who co-founded and owned the airline itself. This is the story of Dr. Amara Reed and Officer Frank Miller, and the karmic reckoning that followed. The air in JFK's Terminal 4 was thick with the usual symphony of controlled chaos. The scent of burnt coffee, overpriced perfume, and the faint, clean smell of jet fuel hung in the recycled air. It was a river of humanity, flowing in currents of anxiety and anticipation. Dr. Amara Reed stood near the boarding gate for Aura Airlines Flight 117 to London Heathrow, a picture of modern success. She was dressed in a tailored forest green tracksuit from a boutique designer, her feet in comfortable yet stylish sneakers that cost more than some people's rent. Her hair was styled in intricate, elegant braids that cascaded over her shoulders. At 42, Amara possessed a calm, commanding presence that had served her well in countless boardrooms. It was a presence she had earned brick by brick since co-founding Aura Airlines a decade ago with two partners from Stanford. They had seen a gap in the market for an airline that didn't treat its customers like cattle, one that integrated technology seamlessly and valued its employees. Aura was her baby, and its meteoric rise was a testament to her vision. She was on the phone, her voice crisp and clear, finalizing a complex logistics deal with a ground-handling company in Germany. "No, Klaus, the efficiency threshold has to be 96%, not 94%, she said, her tone firm but fair. "The margins are too thin to accommodate that kind of slippage. We model this out. You have the data." A few feet away, Officer Frank Miller of the Port Authority Police Department watched her. Miller was a man built like a cinder block, with a ruddy face and eyes that seemed permanently narrowed in suspicion. In his 25 years on the force, he'd come to see the airport not as a place of exciting journeys, but as a container for the world's problems, which he was tasked with policing. He saw threats everywhere, and his internal calculus for identifying them was deeply, irrevocably skewed by prejudice. He saw Amara not as a businesswoman, but as a loud black woman making a scene. He didn't hear a negotiation. He heard a disturbance. He saw her expensive attire not as a sign of success, but as a red flag. Probably fake, probably stolen. The entire image offended his sense of order. In his mind, people like her were always trying to get away with something. He started walking towards her, his hand resting instinctively on the butt of his holstered Glock. He had a clean record, officially. But his file, buried deep in internal affairs, contained 3 complaints of verbal aggression during encounters with minority travelers. All 3 had been dismissed due to lack of evidence. Leo Petrovsky, the young gate agent for Aura Airlines, noticed Officer Miller's approach. Leo was new, just 6 months on the job, and he was terrified of confrontation. He saw Dr. Reed and recognized her instantly. Not personally, but from the founder's message section of the mandatory employee training. He knew she was the ER in the airline's call sign designation. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. This is not going to be good, he thought. Amara finished her call. "Klaus, send the revised contract over. Excellent. Danke." She slipped her phone into her carry-on, a sleek leather bag that matched her suit. As she turned, she found Officer Miller standing directly in her path, blocking her view of the boarding lane. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass and ID," Miller said. His voice was flat, devoid of any courtesy. It was not a request. It was a demand. Amara blinked, slightly taken aback. The priority boarding for her class had already been called. She was standing in the designated area. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice maintaining its even, calm tone. "The problem is you're causing a disturbance. People are trying to board a flight here," He gestured vaguely at the orderly line. Amara's eyebrows knitted together. A disturbance? She had been on a business call. "I believe you're mistaken, officer. I was just finishing a call." "What I believe," Miller said, taking a slight step closer, invading her personal space, "is that you're being disruptive. Now let me see the boarding pass and your ID." A small, cold knot of dread and fury began to form in Amara's stomach. It was a feeling she knew intimately, the familiar sting of being questioned, of being seen as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. She had faced it in venture capital meetings, in hangar negotiations, and now, absurdly, at the gate of the very airline she had built. She deliberately unzipped her bag, refusing to be rushed. She would comply, but she would do it on her own terms. She handed him her phone, displaying the first-class boarding pass and her passport, opened to her photo page. Miller glanced at the phone, then squinted at the passport. Amara Reed. He read aloud, his tone laced with skepticism, as if the name itself were an alias. He looked from the picture to her face and back again. "This flight is for London?" "It is," she said, her voice turning to ice. "And you're in first class." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "That's what the pass says," Amara replied, her patience wearing paper thin. "Officer, I have a flight to catch. Are we done here?" It was that question, her refusal to be cowed, that lit the final fuse in Frank Miller's mind. Insubordination, arrogance. He saw everything he was conditioned to see. "No, we're not done," he snapped, his voice rising, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "I think you need to come with me. We need to verify these documents." Amara stared at him, incredulous. "Verify them? They are official government-issued documents. You are a police officer. You can see they are real." "Don't tell me how to do my job," Miller growled. "You're being detained for questioning. Step aside now." "I am not being detained for anything," Amara shot back, her voice now ringing with the authority she commanded in the boardroom. "I am a ticketed passenger, and you are harassing me without cause. You will either let me board my flight, or you will call your supervisor. There is no third option." This was it, the moment of truth. For Miller, her defiance was the final confirmation. He saw it as a challenge to his authority, to the very order of his world. He reached out and grabbed her arm. The moment Frank Miller's meaty fingers clamped around Amara Reed's upper arm, the world seemed to slow down. The fabric of her designer jacket bunched up under his grip. It wasn't just a touch. It was an act of ownership, of physical dominance. The murmur of the terminal faded into a dull roar in Amara's ears, replaced by the frantic pounding of her own heart. For a split second, she was not Dr. Amara Reed, co-founder of a billion-dollar company. She was just another black woman being accosted by a white man with a gun and a badge. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. But immediately behind it was something else, something harder and more formidable. Rage. It was a rage honed over a lifetime of microaggressions and overt racism, a rage she had learned to channel into fuel for her ambition. "Get your hand off me," she said. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but it vibrated with such contained fury that it cut through the noise more effectively than a shout. Miller, high on his own authority, only tightened his grip. "You're coming with me. Now. Let's go." He gave her arm a tug, trying to pull her out of the line. The passengers nearby, who had been trying to ignore the confrontation, were now staring openly. Phones like metallic insects began to emerge from pockets. The red dot of a recording light blinked into existence on a device held by a teenager a few feet away. Leo Petrovsky, the gate agent, felt his legs turn to water. His training manual had a section on difficult passenger interactions, but it contained nothing about a police officer physically accosting the co-founder of the entire airline. He knew he had to do something. He took a hesitant step forward. "Officer, sir, is there a problem with her ticket?" Leo's voice was a squeak. Miller shot him a venomous look. "This is police business, son. Stay out of it. Go back to scanning your tickets." He turned his attention back to Amara. "I'm not going to tell you again." That was when Marcus Thorne, the Aura Airline station manager, arrived. Thorne was a man who lived by the corporate playbook. He was in his late 50s, impeccably dressed, with a practiced, calming smile that he deployed to diffuse tense situations, usually involving lost luggage or canceled flights. He had been alerted by another staff member about a disturbance at Gate B24. He saw the scene, the officer, the woman, the crowd, and his mind went immediately to de-escalation and damage control. The primary rule in his book was, always placate law enforcement. "Officer Marcus Thorne, station manager for Aura Airlines," he said, extending a hand that Miller ignored. "What seems to be the issue here? Perhaps I can assist." "Your passenger here is being disruptive and is refusing to cooperate," Miller grunted, still holding Amara's arm. "I'm taking her in to verify her identity." Amara looked at Marcus, her eyes blazing. She knew him, not well, but they had been in meetings together. She waited to see what he would do. Thorne's corporate instincts took over. He saw a cop and a problem. His job was to make the problem go away with minimal fuss. He gave Amara a patronizing, placating smile. "Ma'am," he began, "I'm sure we can sort this all out. If the officer just needs to ask a few questions, perhaps we could step over to my office and clear this up quickly. We'll make sure you don't miss your flight." The words hung in the air, a profound betrayal. He wasn't defending her. He was managing her. He was siding with the aggressor to keep the peace. He had looked at the situation and made the same calculation as Miller. The officer held the power, and the black woman was the variable that needed to be controlled. The cold knot in Amara's stomach turned to solid ice. The last vestige of hope that someone in authority would see the situation for what it was, blatant, unprovoked harassment, vanished. She was alone. "No," Amara said, her voice ringing out with absolute finality. She looked not at Marcus, but directly into Officer Miller's eyes. "We will not be stepping over anywhere. You asked for my identification. I provided it. You have no legal cause to detain me. You have assaulted me. And you," she said, flicking her gaze to Marcus Thorne, her look so withering it made him physically recoil, "are a coward." She then did something no one expected. With a sharp, sudden twist of her body, she wrenched her arm free from Miller's grasp. It was a move born of pure adrenaline and indignation. For a moment there was a stunned silence. Miller, shocked by her physical defiance, instinctively reached for his sidearm, his fingers wrapping around the grip. The crowd gasped. "Don't you dare," Amara warned, her voice like steel. She didn't reach for a lawyer's card. She didn't scream for help. She reached into her leather bag, pulled out her phone, and tapped the screen 3 times. She didn't need to find a number in her contacts. It was on her favorites list. The phone rang once. A voice answered immediately without preamble. "Amara, what's wrong?" Amara held the phone up slightly, her eyes still locked on the stunned faces of Miller and Thorne. "Robert," she said, her voice perfectly calm, a stark contrast to the chaos of the last few minutes. "It's Amara Reed. I'm at JFK Terminal 4, Gate B24. I've just been assaulted by a Port Authority police officer, and the Aura station manager seems to think I'm the problem. I need you to call the PAPD chief of police and the CEO of the Port Authority. Tell them that one of their officers has just illegally detained and physically assaulted the co-founder of Aura Airlines. And tell them," she added, a grim smile touching her lips, "that I have about 24 witnesses and at least 3 videos of the entire incident. They have 5 minutes to get a commanding officer down here before I call CNN." She hung up. The silence that followed was absolute. The name Robert Chen, the notoriously aggressive and effective CEO of Aura Airlines, hung in the air. But it was the words co-founder of Aura Airlines that landed like a bomb, blowing away every assumption, every prejudice that had fueled the entire encounter. Officer Frank Miller's ruddy face went completely pale. The hand that had been so confidently gripping his gun now looked numb and useless. He stared at Amara as if seeing her for the first time, The designer suit, the first-class ticket, the confident voice, it all reassembled itself in his brain, not as a collection of red flags, but as a portrait of immense power. Marcus Thorne looked like he had been punched in the gut. His mind was a frantic scramble of calculations. Co-founder. He had just tried to placate and manage the co-founder of his own company like she was an unruly child. His career, he knew in that sickening instant, was over. The universe had just tilted on its axis at Gate B24. And for Officer Frank Miller, the ground was about to give way completely. The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous and brutal. Power, raw and unseen, had been a ghost in the room. Now it was a physical presence, sucking the air from the lungs of Frank Miller and Marcus Thorne. The passengers, who had only sensed a brewing injustice, now understood they were witnessing a cataclysmic clash of hierarchies. The teenager with the phone held it steadier, realizing the footage he was capturing had just become explosive. Miller's mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. The entire foundation of his worldview, a structure built on a bedrock of racial and social prejudice, had just been demolished. His brain struggled to reconcile the image of the woman he had profiled with the reality of her status. Co-founder? It was an impossible concept. His mind had no category for it. He took an involuntary step back. The aggression drained out of him, replaced by a primal, scrambling fear. His grip on Amara's arm was a phantom sensation, a ghost of an action that he knew would haunt him for the rest of his life. Marcus Thorne, the station manager, was the first to speak, his voice a desperate, cracking plea. "Dr. Reed," he stammered, the honorific now tasting like ash in his mouth. I apologize. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." Amara turned her head slowly to face him. Her expression was devoid of mercy. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "No, Marcus. I believe I understood perfectly. You saw a situation, and you chose a side. You saw a white man with a badge and a black woman, and you made your decision. Your decision was to help him manage me." She let the words hang in the air, each one a nail in the coffin of his career. There was no misunderstanding. There was only a failure of character. Yours. Thorne flinched as if struck. He wanted to explain, to grovel, to rewind time, but he knew it was useless. He had been weighed and measured in a crucial moment, and he had been found wanting. Amara then turned her glacial gaze back to Officer Miller, who now looked small and pathetic, his uniform suddenly seeming like a cheap costume. "You," she said, "put your hands on me. You detained me without cause. You abused your authority based on your own pathetic prejudices. I want your name and your badge number, now." Miller, fumbling, reached for his badge. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely unclip it. "Miller, Frank Miller, badge number 734, he recited, his voice raspy. The number felt like a serial code for his own destruction. Just then, a new figure pushed through the crowd. It was a Port Authority police sergeant, a man with salt and pepper hair and a weary but authoritative face. He had clearly run to the gate, his chest heaving slightly. His eyes darted around, taking in the scene. Miller, pale as a ghost, Thorne looking like he was about to be sick, and Amara standing in the center of it all, radiating an aura of unshakable control. "What the hell is going on here, Miller?" the sergeant demanded, his voice a low growl. Before Miller could formulate a response, Amara spoke. "Are you Officer Miller's supervisor?" The sergeant turned to her. "I'm Sergeant Davies, ma'am. I'm the patrol supervisor for this sector. I received a call." "Sergeant Davies," Amara cut him off crisply. "Your Officer Frank Miller, badge number 734, just committed assault. He physically grabbed me and attempted to illegally detain me after I had already provided him with valid identification and a valid boarding pass. He did this in full view of dozens of people, and it has been recorded. The Aura Airlines station manager, Mr. Thorne, was also present and chose to aid your officer in harassing me." She pointed to her arm. "He grabbed me, right here. I want him placed under arrest for assault, and I want to file a formal complaint against them both immediately." Sergeant Davies stared at her, then at Miller. He could see the truth of it in his officer's terrified eyes. The chief of police himself had just called his personal cell, his voice apoplectic, screaming about a Category 5 disaster at Terminal 4. Now Davies understood. This was her. "Ma'am, please," Davies said, his tone respectful, bordering on pleading. "Let's move to a more private area so we can take your statement." "No," Amara stated firmly. "We will do this right here. This was a public humiliation, so it will be a public resolution. I am not moving from this spot until Officer Miller is relieved of his weapon and officially taken off duty pending a full investigation. This is not a negotiation." The power she wielded was absolute. She wasn't just a wealthy passenger filing a complaint. She was a strategic partner of the Port Authority, a key stakeholder in the airport's ecosystem. Her airline paid millions in landing fees and leases every year. She wasn't asking for justice. She was demanding it, and she had the leverage to ensure it was delivered. Sergeant Davies knew he had no choice. He looked at Miller with utter contempt. "Frank," he said, his voice cold as ice, "give me your weapon. Now." The finality of the act was staggering. In front of the crowd, the gate agents, and the woman he had assaulted, Frank Miller unbuckled his holster and handed his service pistol to his supervisor. It was the ultimate symbol of his neutering, the stripping of his authority. He stood there, disarmed and defeated, his face a mask of utter ruin. "You are on administrative leave, effective immediately," Davies snarled at him. "Get to the precinct. IA will meet you there. Don't talk to anyone." Miller, without making eye contact with anyone, turned and walked away. It wasn't a walk of defiance, but a shuffle of shame. The crowd parted for him, their faces a mixture of pity and disgust. Amara watched him go, her expression unreadable. She then looked at Sergeant Davies. "My flight is in 45 minutes. My corporate counsel is already on his way here. The CEO of my company has spoken to your chief. I expect a full report on my desk by Monday morning outlining the steps you will be taking. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am," Davies said, nodding. "Crystal clear." Amara gave a single sharp nod. She turned and walked past the still frozen Marcus Thorne, stepping up to the podium where Leo, the young gate agent, was standing, wide-eyed. She looked at him and offered a small, genuine smile. "Thank you for trying to help," she said softly. "I noticed. What's your name?" "Leo. Leo Petrowski, ma'am," he stammered. "Leo," she said. "You have a good head on your shoulders. Don't lose that." She then turned, scanned her boarding pass, and walked down the jet bridge without a backward glance, leaving behind the wreckage of two men's careers and the beginning of a storm that was about to break over the Port Authority Police Department. The walk down the jet bridge was the longest of Amara Reed's life. The adrenaline that had surged through her, turning her fear into focused rage, began to recede, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. The sterile corridor, usually a mundane transition, felt like a tunnel between two worlds. Behind her was the public display of humiliation and the assertion of her power. Ahead of her was a 9-hour flight, where she would be utterly alone with what had just happened. As she stepped onto the aircraft, the flight attendants at the door greeted her with practiced smiles. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Reed." They knew who she was, of course. Her photo was on the company's internal portal. They had no idea of the drama that had just unfolded mere feet away. She made her way to her seat, 1A, a private suite with a closing door. She sank into the plush leather, the quiet hum of the cabin a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere at the gate. She closed her eyes, and the image of Miller's face, first contorted in prejudiced rage, then slack with fear, flashed in her mind. The feeling of his hand on her arm returned, a phantom pressure that made her skin crawl. A single tear escaped from under her eyelid and traced a hot path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or fear, but of sheer, unadulterated anger. He hadn't just assaulted her. He had, in that single moment, negated everything she was. Her doctorate in economics, the nights spent sleeping on office floors to get Aura off the ground, the payrolls she met, the thousands of jobs she had created. All of it was rendered invisible by the color of her skin. He had looked at her and seen a threat, a fraud, a problem. And that was a wound far deeper than a bruise on her arm. Back at the gate, chaos reigned, albeit a more organized, bureaucratic form of it. Sergeant Davies was on his radio, his voice low and tense, coordinating the initial response. The flight, Aura 117, was delayed. Operational issues, the board would say. Marcus Thorne stood frozen by the check-in desk, a statue of corporate demise. Employees scurried around him, avoiding his gaze as if his disgrace were contagious. He knew what was coming, a summons from HR, a quiet but firm conversation with a senior vice president from corporate, an offer to resign to pursue other opportunities. His 20-year career at the airline had evaporated in 5 minutes of poor judgment. He had failed the ultimate test, and he had failed it in front of the one person who mattered most. Leo Petrovsky, the young gate agent, was asked to give a preliminary statement to Sergeant Davies. His hands shook as he recounted what he saw. The officer's unprovoked aggression, Dr. Reed's calm demeanor, the physical grab, her final devastating phone call. He was terrified, but Amara's parting words to him echoed in his mind. "You have a good head on your shoulders. Don't lose that." He told the truth clearly and concisely. Meanwhile, the ripples were already spreading. The teenager who had filmed the incident, a 19-year-old named Kevin, looked down at his phone. He had nearly 3 minutes of crystal-clear footage from Miller's initial belligerent demands to the moment he was stripped of his firearm. He looked at his friend. "Dude, what do I do with this?" "Post it," his friend whispered, his eyes wide. "Post it right now, before they try to take your phone." Kevin hesitated for a second. Then his fingers flew across the screen. He uploaded the video to Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube with a simple, devastating caption. "PAPD cop at JFK assaults black woman at boarding gate for no reason. Turns out she owns the airline. #JFK #police brutality #or airlines #Karen cop." Within minutes, it was like throwing a match into a tanker of gasoline. The internet did what the internet does. The video exploded. By the time Aura Flight 117 was pushing back from the gate, the video had 10,000 views. By the time it was taxiing to the runway, it had 100,000. By the time it lifted off into the sky, soaring over the lights of Queens, it had passed 1 million, and the #justice for Dr. Reed was trending. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey's Public Relations Department was thrown into a state of panic. Their phones lit up like a Christmas tree, with calls from the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, Fox News, every major media outlet. They had no statement prepared. They were completely blindsided. Aboard the plane, at 35,000 feet, Amara finally allowed herself to connect to the aircraft's Wi-Fi. Her phone buzzed to life with a furious intensity. Hundreds of emails, dozens of texts. A message from Robert Chen, her CEO, was at the top. "Amara, I am on a flight to JFK now. The legal team is mobilized. The PR team is drafting a statement that will be issued in your name and mine. We will not be passive. We will control this narrative. We will demand accountability. I am so sorry this happened. Rest. We will handle the ground war." She scrolled down, seeing texts from board members, friends, and family who had already seen the news. And then she saw a link to Twitter. With a sense of dread, she clicked it. And there it was, her face, her trauma, playing out on a tiny screen for the world to see. She watched the video, her expression grim. She saw Miller's snarling face, heard her own voice, steady and cold. She saw Marcus Thorne's pathetic attempt at mediation. She saw herself wrench her arm away. She saw the power shift. Watching it as an observer, she felt a strange sense of detachment. This was no longer just her story. It had been released into the wild, a potent symbol of a much larger, uglier truth about the world. It was now a public exhibit in the long, exhausting trial of race and power in America. She closed the phone. The fight at the gate was over, but the war, she knew, had just begun, and she would see it through to the end. The storm that broke was even more ferocious than Amara could have anticipated. By the time her flight touched down at Heathrow, the video of her assault was not just a viral moment. It was an international incident. It led news bulletins in the UK, was analyzed on cable news panels in the US, and became a furious topic of debate across social media worldwide. Frank Miller was no longer just an officer. He was a meme, a symbol of racist policing, his face a global avatar for abuse of power. The Port Authority Police Department and Aura Airlines were now locked in a frantic race to control the narrative. The PAPD, reeling, issued a boilerplate statement promising a full and thorough investigation and announcing Officer Miller's suspension. It was a flimsy shield against a hurricane of public outrage. Aura Airlines, guided by the iron will of CEO Robert Chen, and with Amara's full backing, took a radically different approach. Their statement, released while Amara was still over the Atlantic, was a masterclass in crisis management. It was unequivocal. Aura Airlines is horrified by the unprovoked and discriminatory assault on our co-founder, Dr. Amara Reed, by an officer of the Port Authority Police Department. It began. What Dr. Reed experienced is an outrage that no person, regardless of their station in life, should ever endure. We stand in complete solidarity with her. We will be dedicating our full corporate and legal resources to ensure Officer Miller is held accountable for his actions, both criminally and civilly. Furthermore, we will be conducting a top-to-bottom review of our own internal procedures, including the actions of our station manager, to ensure that our company culture reflects our stated values of respect and dignity for all, at all times. The statement was a bombshell. It drew a clear line in the sand. Aura wasn't just defending its co-founder. It was declaring war on the systemic issues that led to the incident. Marcus Thorne was officially suspended, his name unmentioned but his fate sealed. Leo Petrovsky, in a stunning move, was publicly commended in an internal memo for his attempt to de-escalate the situation and uphold the company's values under duress. He was quietly given a promotion and transferred to a management training program. The official investigation into Frank Miller was assigned to the PAPD's Internal Affairs Bureau. The case landed on the desk of Sergeant Isabella Rossi. Rossi was a sharp, no-nonsense detective who was quietly fed up with cops like Miller sullying the badge she wore with pride. She had a reputation for being meticulous and immune to pressure from the police union. Her first act was to pull Miller's complete jacket. As she read, a grim picture emerged. The 3 prior complaints, all from minority men, were there. They all described a similar pattern: an aggressive, accusatory tone, demands for ID without clear cause, and escalating verbal abuse. In each case, Miller had claimed the individuals were acting suspiciously and had been verbally non-compliant. With no video evidence and with his union rep backing him, the cases were all closed as unsubstantiated. Unsubstantiated, my ass, Rossi muttered to herself, tossing the file on her desk. He was just practicing. Rossi's investigation was methodical. She interviewed every witness from the gate. She obtained Kevin's original high-definition video file. She pulled the terminal's CCTV footage which, while silent, corroborated the visual sequence of events perfectly. She interviewed Sergeant Davies, who described the call from the enraged chief of police. The most difficult interview was with Frank Miller himself. He arrived with his union representative, a pugnacious man named Sal DeLuca. DeLuca's strategy was clear: paint Amara as the aggressor. Officer Miller felt he was dealing with a potentially volatile individual. DeLuca began, his voice slick. She was loud, agitated, and refused a lawful order to present identification. Rossi just stared at him, then played the first 30 seconds of Kevin's video on a large monitor. It showed Amara on her business call, her voice firm but not shouting, followed by Miller's aggressive approach. "She looks volatile to you, Sal?" Rossi asked dryly. "Or does she just look like a black woman who isn't sufficiently deferential for Officer Miller's tastes?" DeLuca bristled, but Rossi pressed on. She played the moment Miller grabbed Amara's arm. Explain the legal justification for the physical contact at this specific moment, Frank, she said, addressing Miller directly. She had already given you her passport and boarding pass. What was the imminent threat she posed that required you to lay hands on her? Miller, his face pale and sweaty, could only stammer. She was trying to walk away. She was being non-compliant. She was trying to board the flight she had a first-class ticket for. Rossi corrected him. The flight run by the airline she owns. The interview was a disaster for Miller. His justifications crumbled under the slightest scrutiny, exposed as thin veils for his prejudice. Meanwhile, Amara, now in London, was not resting. She was fighting. She hired a high-powered civil rights attorney, Benjamin Carter, a man renowned for taking on police departments and winning. On her instructions, Carter filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. But it wasn't just against Frank Miller for assault and battery. It was against the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey as a whole. The lawsuit alleged a pattern and practice of racial profiling and a systemic failure to discipline officers like Miller, citing his past complaints as evidence. It was a brilliant legal move, transforming a personal injury case into a broad indictment of the entire police force. The suit didn't just ask for money. It demanded specific, court-enforced changes, mandatory, enhanced de-escalation and implicit bias training for all officers, a transparent and public-facing complaint database, and an independent civilian review board with the power to overrule IA findings. Amara was using her power not just for personal retribution, but to force systemic change. The incident had given her a platform, and she intended to use every inch of it. The news of the lawsuit dominated a second news cycle, putting immense pressure on the PAPD and the Port Authority. The union could protect Miller from being fired immediately, but they couldn't protect the department from a costly, reputation-shattering legal battle against a plaintiff with bottomless resources and an ironclad case. The storm had fully broken, and now everyone had to choose a side. For Isabella Rossi, the choice was easy. She typed up her final report, attached the video files and witness statements, and concluded that Officer Frank Miller had acted with gross negligence, engaged in discriminatory profiling, made false statements in an official interview, and committed the crime of misdemeanor assault. She recommended his immediate termination from the Port Authority Police Department. The report landed on the police chief's desk like a ticking bomb. The reckoning was coming. The reckoning, when it came, was not a single thunderclap, but a series of devastating, carefully orchestrated strikes. The system that had protected Frank Miller for 25 years began to dismantle itself around him. Crushed by the combined weight of undeniable evidence, public fury, and the strategic application of immense power. The first blow was the conclusion of the internal affairs investigation. Armed with Sergeant Rossi's meticulous and damning report, the PAPD chief had no choice. The Police Benevolent Association, represented by Sal DeLuca, fought tooth and nail, threatening work slowdowns and public protests. But they were arguing against a video seen by over 100 million people. They had no leverage. Frank Miller was officially terminated for cause, a decision that made him ineligible to receive his pension. The 25 years of service he had counted on to secure his future were wiped out. The second blow was criminal. The Queen's District Attorney's Office, under immense public pressure and presented with a case on a silver platter by Amara's legal team, pressed charges. Frank Miller, the man who had seen himself as the guardian of order, was charged with misdemeanor assault, official misconduct, and unlawful imprisonment. A photo of him, henpecked and defeated, walking out of a courthouse after his arraignment became another viral sensation. The hard karma was grinding him down. The third and most significant blow was the civil lawsuit. The Port Authority, facing a PR nightmare and a legally unwinnable case, chose to settle. But Amara Reed and her lawyer, Benjamin Carter, refused a simple monetary payout. The settlement, which was made public, was historic. It included a substantial 7-figure donation to a non-profit organization dedicated to fighting for racial justice. But more importantly, It forced the Port Authority to agree to nearly every one of their demands. A new Amara Reed initiative was established within the PAPD, mandating annual rigorous training in implicit bias and de-escalation, taught by outside experts. A new independent oversight committee was formed, with Benjamin Carter being appointed as one of its first civilian members, giving him a direct role in reviewing future complaints against officers. The PAPD was forced to reform itself from the inside out. For the individuals involved, the karma was personal and direct. Marcus Thorne, the station manager, was formally dismissed from Aura Airlines. He sent a long, rambling letter of apology to Amara, who never responded. He found himself unemployable in the airline industry, his name synonymous with corporate cowardice. The last anyone heard, he was working as a mid-level manager at a regional logistics company, a shadow of his former self. Frank Miller's fate was the most severe. He pleaded guilty to the misdemeanor assault charge to avoid a trial and potential jail time on the other counts. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation, mandatory anger management counseling, and 500 hours of community service. He lost his home due to his inability to make mortgage payments. He was divorced by his wife, who cited the public humiliation as the final straw. The final perfect scene of his downfall occurred a year later. Miller, now heavier and grayer, was working as a security guard for a third-party contractor assigned to a cargo warehouse on the far side of JFK Airport. His job was to check trucks in and out, a monotonous, soul-crushing existence. One sweltering afternoon, he stood by his guard shack, wiping sweat from his brow. A roar filled the sky above him. He looked up, his eyes squinting against the sun. It was an Aura Airlines A350, gleaming white and green, climbing gracefully into the sky on its way to a far-flung, glamorous destination. He watched it until it was just a speck, a symbol of the world he had been banished from. A world where women like Amara Reed built empires while men like him were left behind in the dust, forgotten. He felt a familiar, bitter resentment rise in his chest, but now it was impotent, pathetic. He was no longer a man with power, just a man with a past. As for Amara Reed, the incident changed her. It hardened her, but it also sharpened her focus. She became a more vocal advocate for social justice, using her platform and her wealth to fund initiatives aimed at empowering minority entrepreneurs and fighting systemic racism. She promoted Leo Petrovsky again, this time to her own executive team, making him a special liaison for corporate culture. She wanted his brand of quiet courage to be embedded in the company's DNA. She never forgot the feeling of Miller's hand on her arm, but she refused to let it define her. It was simply a data point, a brutal reminder of the world as it was, and a catalyst for her mission to reshape it into the world as it should be. She continued to build her airline, to innovate, to lead. She flew first class, she wore her designer clothes, and she spoke with the same confident, commanding voice. But now, when she walked through an airport, there was a new awareness in the air around her, a quiet understanding. She was not just a passenger. She was a force to be reckoned with. The hard karma had not just punished the guilty, it had empowered the victim and, in its own small way, had bent the arc of the moral universe a little closer toward justice. 3 years is long enough for a storm to pass, for the ground to dry, and for new things to grow in the soil it churned up. The viral fury of the JFK incident had long since faded from the trending topics, replaced by 1,000 other fleeting outrages and digital tempests. Yet, its echoes remained, shaping the lives of those who stood at its epicenter in profound and permanent ways. For some, it was the echo of a door slamming shut. For others, it was the sound of a universe of opportunity opening wide. Leo Petrovsky heard it as a symphony. At 28, he sat at a polished mahogany table in Aura Airlines corporate headquarters, a place he once could have only dreamed of entering. He was no longer a nervous gate agent, but the director of in-flight experience and cultural standards, a title created specifically for him. His gaze drifted across the data projected on the screen. Quarterly reports from the Amara Reed Initiative. The metrics were undeniable. Since the implementation of the new intensive bias training across all customer-facing staff, negative incident reports involving claims of discrimination had plummeted by 82%. Employee satisfaction in the training was in the 95th percentile. A senior vice president, a woman named Claire, nodded at the screen. "This is remarkable, Leo. Truly. You've embedded this into the culture." Dr. Reed embedded it. Leo corrected her gently, a habit he'd formed. "I'm just the custodian." He thought back to that day, the terror he felt, the acrid taste of fear in his mouth as he watched Officer Miller grab Dr. Reed's arm. He remembered her words to him afterwards. "You have a good head on your shoulders. Don't lose that." She had seen something in him, not heroism but a basic, trembling decency, and she had nurtured it. After his promotion, she had taken him under her wing, becoming a tough but invaluable mentor. She taught him that corporate responsibility wasn't about PR statements. It was about data, accountability, and embedding values so deeply into a system that they function even when no one is watching. He wasn't just a director. He was a testament to her philosophy that power should be used to elevate potential, not just punish wrongdoing. The echo he lived with was a constant, motivating reminder of his own capacity for growth. For Frank Miller, the echo was a tinnitus of failure, a high-pitched whine that never ceased. His probation was over, but his sentence was for life. The termination and the criminal record were an anchor he dragged into every room he entered. His pension was gone, his marriage dissolved, his name irrevocably stained. The security job at the cargo warehouse had been a dead end, a daily humiliation under the flight path of the company co-founded by the woman he had assaulted. After a year, he had scraped together enough dignity to try for something better. He found himself in a sterile office in a drab industrial park, interviewing for a shift supervisor position at a regional security firm. It paid a few dollars more an hour and came with a sliver of authority he desperately craved. The interviewer, a man named Henderson with tired eyes and a skeptical frown, slid a printout across the desk. It was an article about the JFK settlement. "So," Henderson said, tapping the paper, "this is you." Miller's rehearsed speech died in his throat. He had practiced a version of this moment in his head 100 times. He was meant to be remorseful, humble, a man who had learned his lesson. But seeing it there in black and white, the old, familiar bitterness rose up like bile. It was a setup, Miller heard himself say, his voice thick with resentment. The media, they blew it all out of proportion. She was being difficult, non-compliant. The whole thing was taken out of context. This cancel culture, it ruins lives. Henderson leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He had seen Miller's type before. Men who blamed the world, the system, the victim, anyone but the face in the mirror. He wasn't looking for a perfect employee, but he couldn't afford a liability. A man so steeped in his own grievance that he couldn't see his own role in his downfall. A supervisor had to take responsibility. This man clearly never had. "The thing is, Frank," Henderson said, his tone flat, "I saw the video. Everyone saw the video. You grabbed a woman who was standing there with a passport and a ticket. There's not a lot of context to miss." He slid the article back into a folder. "Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch." Miller knew what that meant. He walked out into the blinding afternoon sun, the echo screaming in his ears. It wasn't just that he had lost his job and his pension. He had lost the ability to even pretend he was the victim. The video had stripped him of that. He was the villain of his own story, and the world would never let him forget it. His hard karma wasn't a single event. It was a permanent state of being, a prison built from his own actions from which there was no parole. For Dr. Amara Reed, the echo had transformed. It was no longer the phantom pressure of a hand on her arm or the sting of public humiliation. It had become a tuning fork, one that resonated with a deep and abiding sense of purpose. She stood at the back of a crowded gymnasium in a Queens community center, not 5 miles from the runways of JFK. The air was warm and filled with the proud murmurs of families. On the stage, A young woman named Maya, barely 20, stood at a podium. She was the first valedictorian of the Aura Scholars Program, an initiative Amara had funded personally with a portion of the settlement money. The program provided scholarships, mentorship, and career coaching for underprivileged youth in the communities surrounding the airport. "Growing up," Maya said, her voice clear and strong, "the sound of the planes flying over my house was just noise. It was the sound of people leaving, going to places I could only dream of. I never thought I could be one of them. Not in the cockpit, not in the boardroom." She paused and looked out into the crowd, her eyes finding Amara's. "But this program, and my mentor, Dr. Reed," she continued, a brilliant smile breaking across her face, "taught me that the sky isn't a ceiling, it's a destination. This fall, I will be the first person in my family to attend college, at MIT, where I will study aerospace engineering. One day, I don't just want to fly on the planes. I want to design them. I want to build them." A lump formed in Amara's throat. She saw herself in Maya. The same fire, the same ambition, the same refusal to be limited by circumstance. This was the final, most satisfying act of reckoning. It wasn't about Frank Miller rotting in his self-made purgatory. It wasn't about Marcus Thorne's disgraced career or even Leo's success. It was about this. It was about turning the ugliness of one man's prejudice into a runway for a young woman's dreams. It was the ultimate alchemy, transmuting pain into progress. Later that evening, as her driver navigated the streets back toward Manhattan, Amara stared out the window. The lights of the city blurred into streaks of gold and silver. The incident had been a crucible, burning away any last vestige of naivety she might have had. It had forced her to wield her power not just as a businesswoman, but as a weapon for justice and a tool for change. A plane roared in the distance, its landing lights cutting through the twilight as it descended toward JFK. 3 years ago, that sound might have triggered a flash of anger, a memory of trauma. But now, it was just a sound, a machine full of people, full of stories, full of hopes, cutting through the sky that belonged to everyone. The echo of that day at the gate would always be a part of her story, a scar to remind her of the fight. But it no longer defined her. She had taken control of the narrative, not just in the media, but in the real world. Frank Miller had tried to put her in her place, but in the end he had only revealed his own, and in the process shown her the true altitude of hers. Her legacy wouldn't be as the woman a cop grabbed at an airport. Her legacy was in the scholarships she funded, the culture she built, the leaders she mentored, and in the bright, determined eyes of a future aerospace engineer from Queens who now looked at the sky and saw not a limit, but a promise. The reckoning was complete. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been used to build a better world. The story of Dr. Amara Reed and Frank Miller is more than just a viral video. It's a powerful, real-life drama about what happens when prejudice meets power. It's a stark reminder that the assumptions we make can have devastating consequences, and that true character is revealed in moments of crisis. While Officer Miller's actions were shocking, the corporate cowardice of the station manager was just as telling. But ultimately, it's a story of karmic justice, showing that accountability, though often slow, can be absolute. Dr. Reed didn't just seek personal revenge. She used her immense leverage to force systemic change, creating a lasting legacy from a moment of profound disrespect. If this story of karmic justice and the fight for accountability resonated with you, please hit that like button to help us share it with more people. Share this video with someone who needs to see that one person's courage can indeed make a difference. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more true-life dramas where the truth always comes to light. Thank you for listening.